Have you ever had an awesome comic idea in your head and then you just sat there staring at the blank page because you didn't know where to start? I've been there. Welcome to Panels in Progress, and in today's episode, we're breaking down the roadmap for building a comic, from format and style to scope and workflow. Whether you're writing a one-shot or you're planning a long, epic adventure, you'll leave this episode knowing exactly what you need to do before you start drawing. I'm Chris, and let's get into it. So I guess I'll start with why I think this is a very important step before making your comic. I have a epic adventure that I would like to tell. It's a story that's called Rim. It's got lots of moving parts, action, horror, drama, and a lot of character building. When I was working on making this story, I knew that I wanted to be a long story, and I planned out the first arc, which turned out to be 12 or 14 chapters. And when I sat down to actually draw it, I kind of blocked myself. I second guessed my character designs, I second guessed the character motivations, I redesigned and redesigned. I got lost in world building because I had two worlds that I needed to create, and then when I was pleased with what I created for the worlds, I decided then I needed to go back and relook at the characters and then wonder if I made enough subplots, and on it went, and I still have no comic to show for. With that in mind, I did attempt a small pre-story, like an epilogue, I guess, or a prologue. I think prologue's the better word, where I just introduced the character, introduced the situation, and I did complete that whole comic. However, I wasn't pleased with how my art style was. I wasn't pleased with what came of it, and so I decided that I wasn't ready to draw it, and I still haven't drawn it to this day. But I would like to prevent you from going through all of that. So first things first, how big is this comic going to be? Is this going to be a one-shot that could be between 8 to 30 pages? It's great for short stories or testing out an idea. Is this going to be a mini-series where there's 2 to 6 issues, sometimes even 12 issues, could be considered a mini-series. It lets you explore a theme, explore thematics. That could also be useful. Or do you want this comic to be an ongoing series where it's like Saga, which is still incomplete? It's One Piece, Berserk. I would have said Bleach was incomplete, but I guess they're wrapping that up or have wrapped it up. I kind of fell off. An ongoing series, and technically most modern superhero comics are ongoing. Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, all these characters have infinite stories and infinite versions of themselves that keep going on and on and on. Have you decided where you want your comic to fall in between these? And actually, I think it's worth mentioning that there's some comics on the fringe side of this too, because what about Instagram comics where it's literally several panels and you're either telling a short story of slice of life or a joke or a situation. There's comic strips that have a very distinct beginning and end, which there is a real art to setting up a joke and delivering it in 4 panels. There's a lot of great Instagram comics out there. But let's get back into the one-shot idea. A short story testing out an idea. This is a great place to gain some experience and skill. This is currently what I'm doing, is making a one-shot, which my one-shot is way more than 30 pages. It ended up being 55 pages, but in doing the one-shot, I learned what my weaknesses were, I learned what my strengths were, and I'm learning so much every single panel, every single page. And it's almost overwhelming, and I'm very glad that I'm doing it. I also plan on doing more. I plan on doing some short stories with some little ideas that I can practice the art of making comics, because there's a lot of moving parts to making comics, and without having those short stories to kind of test out your knowledge, you can get lost. You can get lost in the bigger story that you might be thinking of. So these short stories can be either original ideas, or you could take ideas from books or movies, little scenes, things that happened, or you could even take a comic or manga that already exists. Maybe you like the chapter that they told, or maybe they told a side story, and you could take that and retell it in your own way with your own characters as practice. Remember, if you're borrowing or stealing from other artists, it's always practice, and it's to better yourself, to learn how they did it. How did they set up their panels? How did they set up their page layouts? Try it out, or just try their page layout. I think in Scott McCloud's book, it's either Making Comics or Understanding Comics, but I'm more leaning towards Making Comics, that he has you ask someone else to write a short story. Panel 1 this happens, panel 2 this happens, panel 3 that happens, and however many panels, and then they give you the story, and then you take the comic and make it. Or another exercise to just practice short stories from the same book, Making Comics. He had you basically, either you yourself or a person, take a comic page that already exists and write down exactly what they see in the page. So Spider-Man punches Rhino in the face. Panel 2, Rhino is angry, or whatever the example is. And then they're just giving you a script to practice off of. And with that script, you take that to a page and start drawing it. That's another way you could practice short form storytelling. The mini-series. I'm actually very curious about the mini-series, because maybe I could use this as a jump off point as well for REM. Maybe start it as a mini-series, and then if it gets more attention or an audience, then it can unfold the rest of the story. But a mini-series is very short and contained. I'm thinking of examples like Uzumaki, where there's 12 different short stories involving the same characters around a circular event. A mini-series could be Stray Dogs, which is, I believe there's one official volume. No, it's two graphic novels, but there's like 12 issues, and that's a mini series. Just think of your favorite series that's short, and that could be considered a mini series. And another form that's not quite a mini series, but it is longer, but it has a definite ending, would be things like The Promised Neverland, which has 20 or 21 volumes. Alice in Borderland, which has 9 volumes. I believe Jujutsu Kaisen has a definite ending. Demon Slayer has a definite ending. I'm talking about not the manga that where the artist says, oh yeah, I have an ending in mind, but we just haven't gotten there yet. I'm talking about like, this is it, the story has been told, there is no more. So if I pull inspiration from television or movies, for television, Dexter, even though they keep revamping it, Dexter has a distinct beginning and a distinct end, even though we're not going to talk about the sequels or the spin. Lost, beginning, end. I can't think of anything else. I have completely drawn a blank. You can think about cartoon series too, where I think about Gravity Falls. Distinct beginning, distinct end. Really wish that series wouldn't have ended, but it was great. And then ongoing. So this is your massive stories where it's your saga, which is not complete, even though Brian K. Vaughan has said that there is a definite ending. I'm just hoping it holds my interest until the end, but alas. One Piece, which is going on and on and on and on. Here's what's crazy about One Piece. I'm very interested to see. Like, I want to love it just like everybody else does, but I see how much One Piece there is, and I'm like, this is a life, as it's taking him a lifetime to create this story, that's also a lifetime to read. Actually, let me side note, kind of all over the place, but I just finished reading Bone, which was 1,400 pages of comics, and that has a definite beginning and ending, even though it was very long. I think it said that comic took 12 years to make, but it has a very definite beginning and end. Back to ongoing series. Series that are ongoing, sometimes I would say that it's more difficult for manga than it is for comics. And the reason I say that is because manga usually has a singular vision. It starts with one artist, and then they get assistants and so on and so forth. But that artist and maybe a writer, they're doing that whole story by themselves with the help of assistants for many, many years, as long as people are reading them. But there's not necessarily a guarantee that just because... Actually, I'm not going to get into that. My point is, the reason why I said I think ongoing series are easier for comics or even maybe webtoons is that these stories can be picked up by any artist, and they're like toys. They can be played with and then put back together if they're a singular character. Now, if it's a creator-owned thing that you are creating, then the story can go on for as long as you want to write it. There's this artist, I can't remember her name, I just remember the book, which is The Last Halloween, and it's a webcomic that she got printed, and I love that story, and I'm very interested to see what happens with those characters. However, she has been on hiatus and has not completed the second book, and I don't know if I'll ever get a resolution. I think that's the hardest thing about being a reader of comics, manga, and graphic novels, is that some of the stories that are started, they might not ever have an ending. So keep that in mind. An example of a story that could either be 10 pages or 100 issues is A Cursed Knight. A Cursed Knight is on an adventure to resolve or to become uncursed. That could be 10 issues, that could be 10 pages. It all depends on the storytelling. But at the very beginning, before you start drawing, you should at least know a general idea of how long your story is going to be and how much space or time it's going to take to create it. Another thing to think about before you start creating your comic is your audience. Now, sometimes that one's hard because you're creating what you like, but is this a kid's comic? Is this a teenage comic? Young adult? Adult? Like, who is your audience? Who's this comic for? And if you're saying like, oh, it's for everyone, you're correct. Everyone can read it, but certain topics would be better suited for certain audiences, and thinking about your audience in advance will help you. So for instance, the comics I make currently between Webtoon and Rim and Doppel's my one shot. My comics are for, I would say, young adult to adult, because they're horror things and they're topical in nature, in the aspect that a young kid is not going to understand marital issues that Doppel's talking about. They're not going to understand that theme. But an adult who has had some relationships, who has been in a situation where the person they are with isn't acting how they would normally act, a young adult to an adult would pick that up. Think about your audience and how that could depend on where you go next. So after you've gotten those two things figured out, what's next is your art style. How will your comic look? How will it read? Will this be a manga versus Western? Will this be a cartoon or minimalist comic? You don't have to be a pro artist. You just need to figure out what style is going to match the tone of your comic. For example, think about Philadelphia, the comic. It's a horror, gritty comic set in the urban area, the city, obviously, Philadelphia. And think about Adventure Zone, the comic, which is brightly colored, loosely lined. I would consider it young adult kids, but some of those kids' jokes are going to fly over the or some of the adult jokes are going to fly over the kid's head, but it's very bright. Now imagine if that Adventure Zone was drawn in a style for Philadelphia. The tone wouldn't match because Philadelphia is very dark and gritty, and it's supposed to evoke emotions of fear and horror and darkness. But if that style was on Adventure Zone, then Adventure Zone wouldn't be the fun, easygoing, lighthearted adventure that it is. It would completely change the tone of it. Another example, I think about Death Note and Witch Hat Atelier. Death Note is drawn as well. It's a darker style. It wants to be taken seriously, as if it's happening in the real world. It's very suited in reality. Even though, yeah, fantastical things are happening. A notebook that if you write your name in it, if you write somebody's name in it, they die. It's taken seriously. But Witch Hat Atelier is very lighthearted, is very whimsical. Yes, it has a couple moments where there's some darker things, but for the most part, it's very lighthearted and open. Now imagine if Witch Hat Atelier style was put on top of Death Note. You wouldn't be able to take that book seriously. You'd probably not get those darker moments when Akira is trying to decide who dies and who lives when he's playing God. And then if you put the Death Note style on top of Witch Hat Atelier, it would change the entire mood of the whimsy and the fantasy and the wonder that Witch Hat Atelier has. So keep that in mind, but I will say that there are some comics that completely break these rules when it comes to style and tone. There was a comic that I read last year, or some of this year maybe, but it's called What Lies Beneath the Trees, Where Nobody Sees, and it's a storybook style comic, or art style. You know, think like Berenstain Bears or those comics where animals are the main characters. It's actually brightly colored. It's got simple lines. Like a kid could pick it up and think that it was for them. However, the story matter of What Lies Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees is basically, think Dexter meets Berenstain Bears. Yeah. So it could work. And then another thing, another example is Feral. Feral is The Walking Dead meets Cats, and it's drawn in like a Disney-esque animal style, like Aristocats, and it's really nicely done. It still works. You would think that, oh, this is a kid's comic, but really it has some mature things happening to these cats where they're put in these dangerous situations. So I don't think there's a problem with either of those comics. I enjoy both of them. I think it's more of knowing your intention of what you're doing. If you have a kid-friendly style, but you're going to do dark subject matter, then make sure that your audience knows that that's their expectation. Don't surprise them with the dark stuff if you really are just trying to elicit some emotions or shock factor or something like that. Next is the format. Is this comic going to be print? Is it going to be a traditional comic book or graphic novel? Are you going to post it on Webtoon or Tapas or wherever you can post it? You know, will it be scrolling format or will it be still standard page format, optimized for phones? Is this going to be an Instagram comic where you post a couple panels in a carousel post? What's the plan? Because the reason this part is important to know is because depending on what you plan to do with this comic after you complete it, depends on how you should plan for it. If you know that you want to print this comic out and have it in a book format, it probably would be best to do all your thumbnailing and your digital files or traditional pages as a page layout in a book format. But if you already know that this is only going to be on Webtoon, it's only going to be on Tapas or your website or only viewed on a phone, then yeah, go ahead and just start thumbnailing for that media. Basically know where you want it to end. And side note, I've done some research on the subject. It's actually easier to start with the page format for your comic and then put it in a webtoon format, than to take a webtoon format and then put it into a page comic. I've seen it done, yes. I looked at solo leveling books. I looked at a couple of other webtoons that got printed, and you can tell that webtoon was not its, or you can tell that the book format was not the first viewing. Space Boy, I think. Space Boy is another ongoing series. It's got like 22 issues. They do their best to make the comic fit the page format, but you can still tell that this used to be a webtoon just on the layouts of the pages. And now that you know whether it's going to be a print or webtoon, let's go to how you're going to actually bring this thing to life. The real life logistics. Are you going to use Clip Studio Paint, Procreate, Photoshop, or are you going to use pen and ink, paper, traditional materials? Is this going to be a solo project? You are doing all the work from beginning to end. You're doing the drawing, you're doing the writing, you're doing the coloring, you're doing the inking, or are you going to have help or a team? Is it a group of you working together to bring this vision to life? And what kind of schedule are you thinking? Is this just practice where you don't really have a schedule that you need to adhere to? Are you trying to meet weekly deadlines where you post your pages somewhere every week? Are you trying to post your pages once a month? What's your plan for that? And I'd say don't be too rough on yourself, especially if this is your first comic, if this is your first major comic. Be easier on yourself than you think you need to. I would say whatever your expectations are, maybe add some extra time, because life can really come up out of nowhere. For instance, I've been working on Doppel since October of last year. It's a 55-page comic, and I thought that I would be able to complete this entire comic from layouts, inks, colors, lettering, everything in 4 months. Well, it's now May and I'm still coloring the comic. It's getting closer and closer to being done, but this comic has challenged me in ways I never would have thought possible. I did want to participate in the Webtoon Challenge, but I'm not going to force myself to make that challenge. So with that being said, I'm taking all the pressure off myself and I'm just focusing on finishing the comic and making it the best possible comic that I can at this time. So start small, and even if you only do like an 8-page comic, that's a win, because finishing the comic is the hardest thing for most people to do. A lot of people start mini pages, start mini comics, and a lot of stories, a lot of comics don't get finished. So if you can finish a comic and then another and then another, you're already ahead of the game. And then of course, planning around actual life, that's going to help you just have a better work-life balance. If you're not a full-time artist, if this comic project is a part-time thing or a hobby, then just see what you can dedicate to it. For me, I like to dedicate my time after work to working on it, and usually that's just 2 to 3 hours a night. And sometimes I only have 1 hour a day to work on it. But what's great about it is that every single time that I continue to work on it, I'm doing more and more, and I'm getting closer and closer to finishing. Be easy on yourself and just pace yourself and temper your expectations of how long it might actually take you, especially if this is your first time making a comic. Alright, I want to give you guys a pre-production checklist. So here's your comic starter pack. Before you start drawing anything, make sure you've got all of these things checked off. You want a summary or pitch of your story, which is 1 to 3 sentences about your story. Basically, think of it like an elevator pitch or maybe the back of a book blurb about your story, talking about your character, what they are going through, how they might overcome it, and what's stopping them, what's hooking audiences to read your story, or what you want your audience to be hooked on to read your story. Then work on the script or outline. You don't need a full screenplay, but at least know what happens in each scene. If you are doing all of the work, whether it's drawing or writing, then you don't need to have a particular format for your script. Just take a couple pages, take a couple sheets of paper, and write your story out, who's saying what, who's doing what, just so you can get an idea of what's happening in the story. I call it loose scripting because you're the only one who needs to understand how to read it because you're doing the drawing. Next will be your character designs. You're going to draw these characters thousands of times, so you really want to make sure that you understand what they look like. I like to pull from my animation background, which is doing model sheets and character turnarounds, facial expressions, key object sheets. Like if they have like special weapons or things like that, do sheets for those, as well as background environments, general layouts. Just try to have a good idea of what you might need before going into your comic. And then this is a new one that I haven't tried yet, but I think I'll be trying it on my very next comic, which is sample pages. This is 1 or 3 test pages that help you gauge timing, pacing, and style. So the test pages would be a great way to test out everything. Basically, it's like a proof of concept, a proof of your idea, where you're going to have a scene that you pull directly from your script. You're going to lay it out, ink it, pencil it. Pencils come before inks. You're going to lay it out, pencil it, ink it, flat it, color it, and add the bubbles. And you're just going to see, like, is this working? Is this style what you want it to be? Is the tone coming out? Is the parts of the story that you're most interested in, does it look how you want it to look? And if so, then that's pretty much a good indication that you're ready to start. Even if you're just sketching a fake page with your character walking down a street, that tells you a lot more than you think. Because maybe if you struggle with perspective, or you struggle with backgrounds, or lighting, or flatting, you're going to find out on these sample pages. One example I have with Rim is that I tested out a prologue scene where I just wanted to see the interaction between the father and the son, because I knew that they had a very complex relationship and I wanted to understand that. And in doing that scene, I got to practice the interaction between the father and the son. That was eye-opening to me, because even though I did all that work, it told me that I wasn't ready to really do the real thing. So it was a great eye-opener, because I would rather do 3 or 5 pages with test pages over trying to work on a major story and not having any idea what's happening or how to complete that. Before we wrap this up, just remember that when you're scripting or drawing or planning this roadmap out, don't feel overwhelmed. That's a normal part of making a comic. Just start small. Probably start smaller than you think you need to start. If you think that you're ready for an ongoing series, maybe just try a mini-series first. If you think you're ready for the mini-series, maybe just try the one-shot. If you think you're ready for the one-shot, maybe just a short scene, short story. Make it small and make it doable. Make it easy for yourself this first time around. Don't let perfection kill your progress. I can easily say that I have fallen victim to letting perfection win, where I haven't been working on my dream comic because I'm still thinking that I need to learn better anatomy, better faces, better composition, better colors, like everything. But that's what every artist wants. Every artist wants to be the best that they can possibly be before they make their comic. And I want to say to you, just start. Just make something, because you can always change it later. You can always fix something that's already on the page. You can always edit something that's already written down. You can correct things that don't look right. But if it's not there to begin with, you have nothing to stand on. So just create what you want to create, and you can make the edits or revisions later. Or, surprise, surprise, sometimes you come back after a couple days or a couple weeks after looking at what you've created, and you're like, wow, this actually is pretty good. And when you can say that about your own work, I think you can be proud. So that's the roadmap. Define your scope, pick your style, plan your workflow, prep your materials. No matter your skill level, starting with a plan makes everything smoother. Got a comic idea in your head? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to know what you're working on or what you're planning on working on. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with your other creators. Well, that's it for this episode. And I want you guys to remember, we've all got to start somewhere. So keep creating, and we'll talk soon.